I've always told myself that no matter what job I end up doing, I never want to work the night shift again. This is the reason why. Back when I was still a frita, I worked the kitchen of a family restaurant that had been around for years. Hi, Jay here. A frita is a Japanese term for a person aged between 15 to 34 who is not a student or a housewife but lacks full-time employment, instead supporting themselves through a succession of part-time or temporary jobs. Back to the story. Because I was part-time, I got put into whatever time slots were short on staff. Naturally, that meant I kept being asked to cover the deep night shift. They asked and I said yes without thinking twice. I found out pretty quickly that late night and closing work at a family restaurant is much busier than I'd imagined. The idea of being alone in the kitchen in the middle of the night was scary in theory, but the work itself was so intense that at first the fear got buried under everything I had to do. Washing, disassembling, cleaning, prep for the next day. I just focused on the job. One night, like usual, I clocked in, went into the kitchen, washed my hands, and grabbed some paper to dry them. As I was wiping my hands, the sensor tap I'd just finished using suddenly turned on by itself. Water came out in a full stream, as if someone had put their hands under it again. Maybe the sensor's just slow to react. I shut off the water and got on with my tasks. After a while, one of the waiting staff came into the kitchen and said, "We're at no guest now." No guests means no customers in the restaurant. I glanced at the clock. It was a little after 2 a.m. For the waiters, that meant a breather. For the kitchen, things were just getting busy. From that point, it was all the closing work. Cleaning each area thoroughly, scraping the built-up grime off teppan, and making it shine. Taking out everything that needed to be stored and putting it away in the big walk-in fridge. Getting sauces, sides, and ingredients sorted for the next day. Usual end-of-night chaos. I was in the middle of all that when one of the hall staff, Kawamura-san, everyone called her Kei-san, so I will, came over and spoke to me. It's supposed to be no guest, but I keep hearing sounds from the bathroom. Now, I'm naturally a jumpy person, so my mouth reacted before my brain did. Huh? Seriously? I blurted it out and stepped into the hall area. Kei-san looked a bit uneasy. If it's a robber or something, then that's scarier than a ghost, you know. So can you come with me? That actually made sense. I told myself it was better if it turned out to be a person than anything else. And I tried to squash the part of my brain that had already decided it was something supernatural. Together we headed towards the restroom area. The door that led to the restrooms opened into a little corridor. As soon as Kei-san pushed that door open, we could tell that the noise was coming from the sink area near the wash basins. I stayed behind her, not keen on being in front, while she stepped in properly. My legs were literally shaking in the doorway when Kei-san suddenly called out, Okay, that's all it is." Drawn by her tone, I forced myself to peek over her shoulder. One of the sensor taps at the sink was running by itself, water gushing in steady bursts, on, off, like someone was repeatedly putting their hands under it and pulling them away at a fixed rhythm. So this one's also running on its own, was my first thought. Kei-san, on the other hand, seemed relieved. The mystery was solved as far as she was concerned, and she started looking for the manual controls. "Looks like you can switch it to manual with this button," she said, pressing a small button near the tap. As soon as she did that, the water stopped. I sighed, and Kei looked straight at me and said, "Sorry I made you come with me as some kind of human shield. I was just a little freaked out that it might be, that kind of thing." She held her hands out in front of her with bent fingers, doing the classic ghost pose as she said it. I couldn't help asking, "What do you mean by that exactly?" And according to Kei-san, this was something she'd heard secondhand herself. Before this family restaurant was built, the land used to be a graveyard. They bulldozed the cemetery and put a restaurant on top of it. And ever since then, there's been all sorts of strange occurrences. Now that I think about it, there was what Mori-san said too. Mori-san was one of the kitchen staff. a guy who'd been working there for more than 5 years. On one late night shift, he'd been walking down the dim corridor that led to the employees' break room. That area is supposed to be staff only. Customers never go back there, and he said a small child ran past him down that corridor, but there were no kids in the building at the time. It was the night shift. No one from the outside should have been there at all. I remember hearing something about that, and we all kind of half laughed about it back then. Anyway, let's hurry up and finish up so we can clock out and be somewhere else, Kei-san said, snapping me out of my thoughts, and we went back to closing the restaurant. After a while, we managed to get through almost everything we had to do. The last steps were put all the sauces and items that only needed to be stored temporarily into the big walk-in fridge, then cut all the power and lock up. We were finally nearing the end of a pretty tense night. I put the last containers in their places on the shelves inside the walk-in and turned around and headed for the door to step out. The heavy fridge door swung shut behind me. You're kidding me, I thought. Not now. I really don't need this now. The door sealed with a magnetic strip. You could open it from the inside, but it required quite a bit of force. In all the times I'd worked there, I'd been only accidentally shut in the walk-in 2 or maybe 3 times. In those situations, there was really only one way to handle it. Body check the door until it gave way. I leaned back and threw my weight forward. My shoulder thudded into the metal, but the door barely budged. It still wouldn't open. My heart was banging, and I was starting to feel a little lightheaded from the cold and low oxygen. I paused for a second to catch my breath, and that's when I noticed something else. There was another sound, faint at first, coming from the outside of the walk-in. The moment I stopped moving, that sound stopped as well. When I slammed into the door again, bang, bang, like something else was making the same noise in time with me, on just the other side. Like a dry rustling sound, like someone rummaging through boxes or bags. The noise wasn't right at the door. From the direction and the way it echoed, it felt like it was coming from deeper inside the freezer section at the back. I was in the fridge part. If whoever, or whatever is doing that, decides to open this fridge door, I am done. That half-formed thought flashed through my mind. The only plan I could come up with was get the door open now and sprint for the kitchen exit. I braced myself and body-checked the door again with everything I had. This time, unlike before, the door opened easily, like someone had let go from the outside. The metal panel swung wide with almost no resistance. At that exact moment, the rustling stopped. I stood there for a second, thrown off by how suddenly everything had fallen silent. What was making that noise? Curiosity and fear sort of collided in my mind, and before I could stop myself, I stepped out of the walk-in and I leaned towards the freezer area. I just had to take a look. Inside, there was something. It was roughly human-shaped, but if you asked me if it was a person, I'd have to say no, it wasn't. A tall black silhouette, bent very slightly forward, standing amongst the boxes. It had features where a face should be, but the eyes, the mouth, everything was just pure black, as if someone had painted over them completely, like a drawing of a face where every detail had been filled in with a thick marker, and this thing was staring right at me. Some weird noise fell out of my mouth. My legs went weak in a way that didn't feel like my own body. I stumbled back out of the fridge area, half tripping over my own feet, until I managed to get into the dark corridor between the kitchen and the hall. Kei-san was there too. She had a hand on the wall near the light switches, looking rattled. Just now, I thought I saw a child running. She started to say something, but I cut across her without meaning to. There's something in there. We should get out of here right now. My voice came out louder than I intended, and for a moment the two of us just stood there, both trying to decide if we'd really seen what we had seen. Luckily, the main light switches and power controls were all on the hall side. Kei-san snapped into motion. She hurriedly shut off what needed to be shut off, grabbed her bag, her clothes, and I did the same. Apron off, I threw on my jacket and I grabbed my stuff. We went out through the back door into the loading area. While Kei-san was locking up from the outside, I made the mistake of listening too hard. Oh, I wish I didn't. From inside the building, close to the door, I heard it. Footsteps. The sound of small feet running in our direction from somewhere within that dark restaurant. The moment the lock clicked into place, the sound cut off. After that, Kei-san walked home. She always came on foot. I sat in my car, hands shaking, then threw my jacket properly over my uniform, and I drove home. Since that night, there haven't been any other obvious, unexplainable incidents that I know of. But that one experience was enough for me. Not long after, I quit that family restaurant, and I found a different job. I still don't like being in any kind of food place late at night, even as a customer. Once it gets past a certain hour, I catch myself glancing over towards the kitchen. This happened more than 10 years ago, back when I was a student working part-time at a karaoke place near my house. It was one of those big chain karaoke joints everyone in Japan knows about. Multi-floor, bright sign, and rows of tiny rooms. I mainly worked serving drinks and cleaning. One day after a group had just checked out, I was told that room 207 was now empty. I grabbed my cleaning cart and I headed in there alone. I went up the staff staircase and stepped out into the corridor. The hallway on that floor ran straight ahead in front of me. About 3 meters away, on the left-hand wall, was the door to 207. I started pushing the cleaning cart from the end of the hall, and out of habit I glanced towards the door to check the room number. That's when it happened. I saw someone going into room 207, or more precisely, I only saw a hand slip in before the door shut. A slender, feminine hand with bright red nail polish. That vivid glossy red you can see clearly even under fluorescent lights. Just that hand, disappearing past the doorframe into that room. Forgot something? I thought. Sometimes after checkout, a customer will realize that they left their phone or their wallet and they come sprinting back into the room. It happens. If that was the case, they'd be out again in a matter of moments. There was no point walking in whilst they were searching around and making it awkward for them. I figured I'd just wait in the hallway. Besides, I couldn't really start cleaning properly with someone still inside anyway. So I stayed there, one hand on the cart, just looking at the closed door of 207. From inside the room I suddenly heard a sound. It was loud, like when someone blows straight into the karaoke microphone, on purpose, a heavy, breathy noise blasting through the speaker. My shoulders twitched, and for a second I just listened. I tried to calm myself down. It's probably just some annoying customer staying behind and messing around while their friends are waiting to pay. Now that I thought about it, a song had been playing the whole time too. The track was a kind of techno-ish pop song that had been popular a while back, not some fresh chart hit, something older. From that, I guessed that the customer shouldn't have been all that young. You're old enough to know better at this stage. What are you doing? Seriously, go home. The more I thought about it, the more irritated I got. I just decided I would walk in and catch them in the act, staying in the room after checkout, fooling around with the microphone. If nothing else, I wanted to give them at least a pointed look, and we need to clean, you know. I marched up to the door of 207 and I yanked it open, and the moment the door swung inward, the room went dead quiet. The weird breathing noise from the microphone cut off. The karaoke backing track, which had been pounding away right up until then, stopped too, like someone had hit the cancel button a split second before I opened the door. Only the faint trace of the last few notes was fading out from the ceiling speaker. That alone felt off. But what really made my mind stall was this. There was no one inside the room. No customers, no one standing or sitting, just an empty karaoke box. The microphone was lying on the floor in the middle of the room, still switched on, its tiny power light glowing steadily in the silence. I spent as little time as I could in room 207 after that incident. I wonder if something happened in there, or if it had some significance for someone who's no longer with us. This happened more than 10 years ago, back when I was working nights at a manga/internet cafe. You know the type of place, rows of dim little booths, the smell of instant noodles and cigarette smoke clinging to the walls, all-night drink bar humming in the background, cheap beds for people who missed the last train, half hotel, half hiding place. I was a student then, and the night shift paid a bit better, so I'd taken it without thinking too hard. That night was like any other. It was past midnight. After the last train crowd already settled into their cubicles, the TV area in the corner was dark, the only light coming from the glow of monitors. I was at the front counter, doing checkout processing for the last few customers who were leaving early. And that's when this guy came up, a man in his 30s, maybe early 40s. Cap pulled down low, surgical mask on, hoodies zipped up even though it was warm inside. Nothing you wouldn't see on any Tokyo street at night. The thing that snagged my attention wasn't his clothes, it was the way his gaze kept flicking upwards. Every time I looked at his face to speak to him, his eyes would slide past me and tilt up towards the ceiling, the exact spot where the security camera was mounted over the counter. Not a quick glance either, more like he was double and triple checking the angle. "Good evening," I said, like always. "Are you checking out?" He didn't answer right away. I watched his eyes do that small automatic movement again, up to the camera, back to the monitor, and then finally down to meet mine. "Check out," he said. His voice was normal, soft, polite. That almost made it worse. I took his membership card and put it through the system. Booth number 23. Usage, about 4 hours. Nothing special. "Your total is 1,780 yen, I said. He pulled out his wallet and paid exact change without hesitation. His hands didn't shake. His breathing was steady. He was, on paper, the perfect customer. No complaints, no trouble, no questions. But up close, one thing wouldn't leave my mind. His eyes. His pupils felt slightly too small for the light in the room. Not in any kind of medical way, just wrong, like he was permanently bracing for something. He kept his expression neutral, but the eyes themselves were sharp and restless, scanning for exits, angles, blind spots. The whole time I was explaining the bill and thanking him, his eyes were drifting away from my face, then snapping back, like he was pretending to listen. It felt like talking to someone who was already halfway out the door in his head. He took his receipt, dipped his head a little, and then walked out without another word. The bell on the front door chimed once, and that was it. Just another late-night customer, going out into the crowds of the big city. Well, that's what I thought. Once he left, I did what I always do on quiet nights. I went to check the booth he had been using. Booth 23 was near the back, on the left side of the corridor, the kind of narrow aisle where you can hear every chair creak and every slipper scuff on the floor. But the only sounds were the sound of someone playing anime softly a few booths away and the low whir of tower PCs. When I reached 23, the curtain was open. Inside, the space was messy, but not shockingly so. Empty paper cups stacked on the table, snack wrappers stuffed carelessly into the magazine rack, and a comic left face down on the keyboard. The chair was pushed back at a slight angle, like he left in a hurry. I checked the floor and under the chair for phones, wallets, anything that he might have forgotten, but there was nothing. The browsing screen on the monitor was just the cafe's homepage. No dodgy sites open, no weird error windows. If he'd been doing anything shady, at least he had the sense to close the tab. I guess he really was just a slightly paranoid night owl. So I wiped the table, collected the trash, straightened the comic, and moved on. Didn't think about him again for the rest of the shift. I finished work, caught the first train home as usual, and crashed in front of the TV with some instant noodles of my own. Morning news, weather, some variety show rerun, background noise to me really. But at some point I must have zoned out, because the next thing I remember was clearly the sound of the TV announcer changing tone. "We interrupt breaking news." I looked up without really thinking. More out of habit. On the screen they switched to a grainy security camera image. It was some convenience store, late night, shelves lined with drink and snacks, and in the middle of the frame, him. Same cap, same mask, same hoodie. Even blurred, even in black and white, there was no mistaking the way his head was angled, not at the products, not at the cashier, but up towards the camera. The announcer continued talking over the image. "The police have released footage of this man wanted in connection with a serious, violent incident." He went on to describe the case. I won't repeat the details, but the point is, this was not some petty theft or minor fraud. It was something dark and unspeakable. I sat on the floor, chopsticks in hand, watching the screen like it belonged to some other world. The camera image changed. Now it was a still shot, zoomed in on his face. The cap and the mask made it hard to see most of his features, but the eyes were clear. Same pupils. A little too hard, same cold scanning look. There was something horribly familiar about the way they were tilted. Not wide with fear or anger, just attentive, focused on things the rest of us really wouldn't think about. In that moment I realized something simple and disgusting. I had stood exactly 1 meter away from this man for several minutes. We'd had a normal customer-staff interaction. I'd even told him to go and have a good night. I watched those eyes up close and just tried to shrug off the discomfort. I remember thinking, if he decided to do something, would I have seen it coming in those eyes first, or just not at all? The newsreader said the footage had been recorded earlier that same night. He'd come to our cafe after that. The TV moved on to other stories, and I just sat there a while longer. The next time I went in for a night shift, the atmosphere felt different. Nothing had changed physically. Same drink bar, same carpet, same disinfectant smell clinging around the showers. A few weeks went by, and then I saw another report. "The man previously featured on our broadcasts has been arrested." They showed him again, this time being led into a station surrounded by police. No mask, no cap, even with his full face visible. What caught me were the eyes. They looked different now. Not softer, not kinder. Just cornered. The same cold watchfulness, but with a layer of irritation. Like he was annoyed the game was over. For some reason I felt more sick then than when I first saw the original footage. Because it drove home the idea for those few hours he'd spent in our cafe. He'd been free, moving around among us, like any other tired salaryman or student, and none of us had any idea who we were sharing the corridor with. I worked the night shift at that cafe for a few more years after that. I had other weird experiences with customers, messy booths, other small dramas, but that one night, with that man watching my security cameras as closely as I watched him, has never really left me. Because ghosts and monsters are one thing. It's the ones who pay on time, say thank you, and walk calmly out the door that seem to scare me the most these days. This is a story I heard from my dad, who used to work as a taxi driver on the night shift. He told me this about 10 years ago. I've been carrying it around ever since. Back then, my dad mainly drove nights. The commission was better, and he liked the quieter roads. That day it had been raining lightly since morning. Nothing serious at first, just that steady drizzle that makes everything a little grey. By the evening, the forecast came on the TV. Heavy rain tonight, drivers are advised to take extra care. The announcer's tone made it sound like it was worse than just a passing shower. I remember turning to my dad and saying, "Maybe you should just take the night off with this weather." He shrugged it off as he put on his jacket and said, "I'll be fine. Nights like these are actually easier. The roads are going to be empty, no clueless drivers cutting in, and the pay's going to be good. It's better than crawling through daytime traffic anyway." All I could really say was, "Okay, just be careful." He laughed and waved and headed out into the rain. And that night, he started his shift like usual. Picked up a few short fares in town, cruised the main roads, listened to the radio between calls. A little before 11 p.m. he got a call over the company radio. A dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. "We have a time booking. Please have a car at Akagawa bus stop for 11 o'clock. Akagawa bus stop? It was a small stop out in the hills, on the edge of the city. Apart from a cemetery and a care home for the elderly, there really wasn't much out there. Once it gets dark, hardly anyone is on foot in that area. And the rain had strengthened by then, big drops thudding against the windshield, wipers working non-stop. Dad said he arrived at the stop a few minutes past 10:50. He pulled up near the bus sign, parked and watched the dashboard clock creep towards 11 o'clock. Outside, the world was just headlights, raindrops, and the hazy outline of the bus shelter. Right on 11 o'clock, he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me." A voice came from the back seat. Dad jumped a little and swiveled in his chair to look back. Sitting there, as if she'd been there the whole time, was a woman in a kimono. He hadn't heard any door open, no thud, no click, no gust of rain-cooled air. Just the voice, and then she was there. He later told me, "Well, I was sure I hadn't unlocked the back doors yet, but with the rain coming down that hard, I figured maybe I just didn't notice her getting in." There was something strange about it, but a customer is a customer, so he slipped into his usual professional mode. "Good evening," he said. "Where to?" The woman replied, "Could you give me a moment?" And then she fell quiet. While he was waiting for her to answer, the rain picked up even more. On nights like that, the water noise turns into its own kind of background hum. The steady drumming on the roof, the wipers scraping back and forth, the occasional splash of a passing car somewhere far off. The air felt a bit heavy, so my dad tried to break the silence. "It's really coming down tonight, huh?" he said. "Feels like a typhoon, just, without the wind." The woman let out a small laugh. "Yes, but I actually prefer the rain," she said. "When it's sunny, I don't feel settled. Rain makes me calmer." Dad thought that was unusual. Most passengers complained about the rain non-stop. "Is that so?" he said. "Not many people say that." And she didn't add anything. For a moment it was just the two of them, in that enclosed space, with the storm pressing in from every side. Then she spoke again. "Driver," she said, "I'll pay you properly, so could you just drive as far as you can go?" Dad was taken aback. "Huh?" slipped out of his mouth before he could stop it. Her expression, though, it was serious. There was no smile, there was no joke in her eyes, just a calm, steady look in the rearview mirror. "As far as you can go," she repeated. "I don't mind where. I'll pay the full fare." It's not that normal of a request. He said he considered telling her he couldn't do that they needed a proper destination. There's something in her tone and maybe the way it felt that night made him hesitate. She might change her mind on the way. Once the meter starts ticking, she'll probably tell me a place to go, right? And with that half excuse in his head, he decided he couldn't flat out refuse. "Alright," he said. "I'll start driving then, and if you think of somewhere, just let me know." He signaled, pulled away from the bus stop, and eased the taxi onto the wet road. That's when the car started acting strange. First, the navigation system. He tried zooming out on the map as he drove, but the GPS marker didn't seem to update properly. The cursor jerked around, drifted off the road, then snapped back. The screen froze more than once. Then the company radio started cutting out. At first, he thought it was a bit of static between messages. Then even when he called in, dispatch replied in broken fragments, like the signal was moving through a tunnel. Eventually, it just went quiet, and he glanced at the time and the distance. This isn't great. If something happens out here in this weather, I can't even contact the office. The road they were on wasn't one he drove often. In the dark, with the rain on full blast, landmarks blurred or disappeared completely. He decided it wasn't smart just to keep driving around aimlessly, so Dad eased the car to a stop at a safe spot by the side of the road, and he took a breath. He turned slightly in his seat to speak to the woman. "Ma'am, I don't know this area that well. I don't come here much. If it's all right with you, could you give me directions? Just left or right, something like that?" He finished speaking, waited for her reply, and then he realized something. There was no one in the back seat. The seat that had been occupied only moments ago was now empty. No rustling of fabric, no door sound, nothing. Just the faint smell of damp and the sound of the rain. Dad told me that for a few seconds, his brain refused to process it. He checked the door locks automatically, and they were still set the way they had been. The only thing that was on the back seat was a folded handkerchief, white with a small, simple flower design. He reached back and picked it up. It had a bit of weight to it. Inside, folded with care, were a piece of stationery and a 10,000 yen note. The bill was crisp and dry, as if it had never seen the rain outside. On the stationery, in neat handwriting, was a short message. "Thank you for keeping me company for a while. Thanks to you, I can leave without any regrets." Dad said it felt less like a cheerful note and more like a final line left behind by someone who had already made their mind up a long time ago. He drove back to the depot later, turned in the car, and went home with that handkerchief still on his mind. We only found out the background sometime after. There had been a famous plane crash in the mountains near Akagawa bus stop years before. A lot of people lost their lives. When my dad told me this story, he finished with, "Maybe she was one of the passengers who never made it home. Maybe she just needed a way to get away from there." Since that incident, every year of the anniversary of the crash, my dad goes to the memorial monument near the site. He doesn't talk to anybody there. He just stands there for a while, puts his hands together, and says a silent prayer. I think in his mind, he's still talking to the woman in the kimono who liked the rain. These are notes from when I was working part-time at the front desk of a love hotel in Tokyo. Hi, Jay here. Quick context. A love hotel is basically a very discreet, very private hotel where couples go in to catch up on their cardio, away from prying eyes. You don't really go there to sleep, you go there to get tired. You pay by the hour. Check-in is through little anonymous windows or machines, and nobody asks questions. Back to the story. Why I took the job. A friend introduced me to a part-time job at a love hotel in Tokyo. It wasn't exactly my dream workplace, but with the pandemic killing off job offers, I didn't really have the luxury to be picky. I went to the interview, got hired, but at a different branch than my friend. I was mostly put on night shifts, working the reception, taking money, handing over keys, answering the phone. That was it. First night. On my first shift, they showed me around the guest rooms, staff changing room, and the basement where they kept all the supplies. The basement was the worst part. Narrow corridors, dim lights, random equipment, and boxes. The kind of place you automatically walk faster in. After the tour, I went back to the front desk. Reception was a tiny box of a room. Desk, computer, register, copier, shelves packed with paperwork. There was a small sliding window for money and keys. Through it you could see the lobby. I was there sorting papers and trying to remember everything when I saw it. Someone walked across the lobby. Just a flicker in the corner of my eye, a pair of pale legs moving past the window. I glanced up at the lobby CCTV. Empty. No guests, no staff, just sofa, fake plants, vending machines. I stared back at the little window. Did I imagine that? First day nerves, weird building, I told myself. I was just overthinking it. Stress hallucination, at best, I decided, and I went back to work. Talking with the manager. By my second or third shift, I'd gotten a bit friendlier with the manager, Yoshida-san. We chatted during the quiet stretches. At some point he asked, "Hey, are you not scared doing the night shifts? A young woman alone? In a place like this at the front desk?" I said I was fine. From there we drifted into spooky story territory, and I asked him if he'd ever seen anything himself. "Yeah, not so much here," he said, "but at other hotels in the chain I've heard stuff from the cleaners." He gave one example. A cleaner was washing the sink, looking up and seeing an old woman in the mirror behind her, but there was nobody in the room when she turned around. Stuff like that. He shrugged. "This hotel, though, is pretty quiet. You don't have to worry about this one." I said, "But you know what? I did see someone walking in the lobby the other day." I told him about the white legs I'd seen. He stiffened a bit and forced a laugh. "Don't say that, that's creepy. I gotta work here." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, so I backed off. You know what, I'm joking. I guess it was just my imagination. And I left it there. Getting comfortable. By my fourth shift, I knew the routine. I could handle the desk alone, so the full-time staff stopped hovering, and I was left to run the reception all night. Because of the pandemic, guests were thin on the ground. Most of my job was handing out keys, taking payments, answering the occasional phone call. Otherwise, nothing. The company seemed to know a young woman alone in a tiny booth might be nervous, so they were pretty relaxed. If it's quiet, you can listen to music or just play on your phone, as long as you handle the guests properly, I was told. Honestly, I remember thinking, this is almost too easy. I settled into the nights, half working, half killing time, with the low hum of the aircon and the distant elevator beeps as my background noise. The first voice. Around my 8th shift, somewhere between 3 and 5 a.m., I was in the booth, playing a game on my phone between customers. Those are dead hours where even the street outside feels emptied out. I was hunched over the desk when a woman spoke to me from just behind and slightly to the side. Not a simple hey. It sounded like a short sentence with a question at the end. I just couldn't catch the words. The voice was soft but close, close enough that my whole body reacted before my brain did. I spun around in my chair. No one, just shelves of files pressing in on the tiny space. If there had been another person inside that room, I would have been nose to nose with them. It was that small. I checked the lobby monitor. No one in the lobby. No one at the door. I told myself I was tired. I repeated, "You're imagining it," in my head until the goosebumps eased, and I finished my shift and I went home. The second voice. 9th shift this time. Same dead of night window, around 3 to 5 a.m. The register is right next to me on the right, and while I was there, the area around the keyboard seemed to dim. Not like the lights went out, more like a greyish haze gathered over that patch of the counter. At that exact moment, the same woman's voice spoke again. Same length, same questioning tone, same direction. Again, I couldn't make out a single clear word. Just that it felt like it was aimed at me, second night in a row. Harder to pretend it was a one-off. The hotel was quiet. No elevator sounds, no doors, no guests on the monitor. I tried to be logical. Listen, you're bored. Your brain's half asleep. Look at what time it is. It's probably just random building noises and your head filling in the gaps. I went back to staring at the screen, pretending that made sense. Voices in the bathroom. On night shifts, we get a 1 or 2 hour break. That night I had mine from around midnight to 2 a.m. The manager told me which cleaned room I could use, a vacant room on the 4th floor, so I went up there and I put the TV on. Normally I'd spend the break on the phone with my boyfriend or my little sister, so I didn't feel so alone. But that night everyone was busy, so it was just me, half watching some late night TV show. Near the end of my break, I heard voices from the bathroom. I went to check. It sounded like it was actually coming from the next room, bleeding through into the bathroom. The tiles made it clearer. I pressed closer to the wall. It sounded like a couple, talking in a relaxed, playful tone, arguing now and then. I couldn't catch the actual words, just the mood. They sounded like they were having fun. I remember thinking, the couple next door is having a pretty good night. My break was nearly over, so I turned the TV off and I went back down to the front desk. The manager was there, covering for me, and I said, "By the way, the soundproofing here is kind of bad, isn't it?" "Hi, Jay here. In these love hotels, soundproofing is pretty much standard, so shouldn't be hearing any outside noise. Back to the story." He asked what I meant, so I told him. On my break, I could hear the couple in the next room really clearly from the bathroom, like they were right there. He frowned and pointed at the occupancy monitor. "Well, that's strange because there's nobody on the 4th floor right now." I checked. Only a few rooms on the 2nd floor were occupied. Because of the pandemic, the cleaners had been cut from the night shifts. No staff upstairs either. No one was supposed to be in any 4th floor rooms. I didn't know how to respond, so I just laughed weakly. Well, maybe I imagined it then. He went off on his break, and I sat back down at the desk with that uneasy, too quiet feeling, and got through the rest of the night. Someone else sees it. By my 11th shift, I had the woman's voice behind me at the desk twice, the couple's voices in an empty room on the 4th floor, and that first glimpse of white legs in the lobby. At that point, just my imagination was getting harder to swallow. I honestly wanted to quit, but the job was so easy and the pay was good, and the idea of job hunting again in that climate made me hesitate, so I forced myself to go on. That night I worked with a different full-time staff member for the first time. He was only about a year older than me, so we got chatting. He asked the usual. "You're really not scared about doing night shifts alone?" I said, "Not really. Are you?" He hesitated and then said, "Yeah, sometimes. I feel like there's something walking around the lobby." I jumped on it. "Right? I see it too, like something's always moving around out there, but there's no one on the cameras." The truth is, from my very first night, I'd felt something walking through the lobby, something passing the reception window. It was like the air itself was being pushed around sometimes. I'd catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, and then there was nothing. Because it kept happening, and nothing big ever followed, I trained myself to just ignore it, like it was some quirk of the building. Hearing someone else say it out loud, though, was weirdly comforting. We traded comments about the thing that walked by the lobby, and he pointed up to the back wall behind the desk. "Do you know what that is for?" There was a small shrine shelf, a little kamidana, fixed above the counter. Given the conversation, I had a bad feeling, and I was right. You know, a woman actually ended it all in this hotel, he said, and they put that up afterwards. I thought about the woman's voice in the booth, the couple's voices on the fourth floor, the constant sense of someone walking where no one was. Even if I told myself it was all in my head, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. That night, I really didn't want to hear any more voices. Later, strangely that night stayed quiet. A little after 4 a.m., the linen company always comes in to exchange sheets and towels. While they were moving around, I felt safer. More people in the building, more noise. They usually finish and leave around 5 a.m., just as the sky is starting to lighten. That morning, as the lobby outside my window turned from black to a washed-out grey, I started to relax. If it stays like this, I can go home, sleep, and pretend that this place is normal. But that's when it happened, of course. From the left side of the reception, a grey shadow suddenly leaned in and looked inside. Not a blur, but an actual silhouette. For some reason, my first clear thought was, male. He was about the height of an adult male, with short hair. His upper body was bent forward, like he was craning his neck to peer in to the small room I was sitting in. He was slightly hunched over, like he had one hand on the counter edge, and his head and shoulders were pushed right up to the small glass window. I couldn't see any facial features, no eyes, nose, mouth, just a sharp grey, black outline. Not misty, not half there. This thing was solid. That image is burned into me. I yelped and jerked out of my chair, basically jumping in place alone in that tiny room. Up until then, the presence in the lobby had always been a vague, something moved kind of feeling. Now this thing was right in front of my face, close and deliberate. And that was the first time I couldn't talk myself out of it. So when I got home, I woke my boyfriend up and told him everything. About the voices, the walking thing in the lobby, the grey shadow leaning in at the window, the shrine, the story about the woman who died there. He listened and said, "You should quit that job." And he pulled out his phone and opened a site. It was that famous stigmatized property map that everybody in Japan knows, Oshimateru. We typed in the hotel's name and address. The map pin popped up. There weren't just one, but two flame icons on that exact building that indicated that something happened there. The entries read, "Female body found," and "Couple murder-suicide." On other sites there were more posts and articles. Apparently, it had been on the news when it happened. I thought back over everything. The woman's voice behind me in the booth, the empty room on the fourth floor with the laughing couple, the little shrine above the desk, and the shadow finally close enough to stare in. Maybe it all was a coincidence. Maybe I was exhausted and primed to see patterns. But it didn't feel like a coincidence. I called in sick the next day. No matter how hard I tried to psych myself up to go back, my body just refused. I started thinking about that tiny room with the window and I felt sick. In the end, that's what made me quit. Now, if you're the kind of person who can't unknow things once you've seen them, it might be worth doing a bit of research before you take on a late-night new job or move into a new apartment. You know, just in case.